Hello, welcome back. And we are now in Chapter 6, Leadership and Influence. And we talked about in Chapter 5, Leadership and Power, and went through the sources of power. Hopefully you took the self-assessment that let you know which type of powers you prefer. We talked about several indicators of powerless speech, as well as powerful indicators of speech and nonverbal. We even went through some status, high and low, and ended right up at compliance gaining, which is essentially where Chapter 6 picks up. So these are all given to you on pages 184 through 185. And the book does an excellent job of not only defining each of these compliance gaining tactics, but giving you an example. And that's important because most of my tests are highly example based. You see I put up there the 16 behavior alteration techniques. Those come from Marwell. And he was the first to identify 16 different compliance gaining tactics, or BATs as he called them. Your book specifically deals with the ones below: rational persuasion, inspirational appeals, etc. So again, you can look at those. The definitions are probably going to be much more helpful on page 184 and 185. What is also interesting is more which ones do we actually prefer? And there's an article under course documents for you to read on this exact issue. So this next couple of slides deal specifically with that article. And it looked at what is an effective influence tactic. So certainly consistency with the prevailing social norms and role expectations. What we're talking about here is something I alluded to in chapter 5. And what that means is the rules. What is expected? What is expected of your job? Is it part of your job domain? Is it consistent with your role that you would be asked to do certain things? So we're looking at the idea of, is this normal? Is this consistent with what we know about the position or the job or being asked of someone? Does that agent actually have the power to use that tactic? And what's interesting is at my former university, we had a 15-minute parking space. And it was right in front of the building I taught in, right where my office was. But there was nobody to punish you if you parked all day in the 15-minute parking spot. Nothing happened to you. So, of course, I parked all day in the 15-minute parking spot. Okay, not every day. But the idea here is if they don't possess an appropriate power base with which to make things happen, you're not going to comply. I mean, somebody has to actually possess the power to enforce the influencer or the compliance gaining tactic. So the potential of the tactic to influence also has to look at my desirability of wanting to do that. How skilled are you in using the tactic? For example, Dr. Spitzberg is very skilled at rational persuasion. He was a debater. He can always make a very calm, rational argument. He excels in that tactic that it's almost impossible to disagree. And how much am I going to resist based on the nature of the tactic? So this kind of goes back to power bases. Some of them we don't like. So we don't like coercion, but if somebody were to use that, I might actually try to resist more because I think it's a crappy way to try to get me to do something. So these were some of the hypotheses in the study that were looked at, wanting to know which of these tactics basically was used more and in what direction in terms of the hierarchy. If you want someone to comply, that's above you, a superior, across, a colleague, or down to a subordinate. And basically, here's what the study found. Here's what we like. In general, rational persuasion seems to win the day. And rational persuasion is logical arguments, facts. It just makes sense. That's what the facts tell us. If you brush your teeth, it will decrease your chance of getting cavities. We have the science on that. It's rational. If I don't brush my teeth ever, they'll rot and I'll have bad breath. We like logic. It makes sense, therefore we'll comply. So rational persuasion seems to be what influences us the most. The next one's kind of interesting because it is inspirational appeal. I do think we like to be inspired, very much so. So we see a high level of inspirational appeal, especially on the downward. So I need to inspire my subordinates, get them excited about what they're doing. Consultation, also a very persuasive tactic. And remember, this is seeking input for suggestions, improvements, how to change. So I think of consultation as collaboration. So we've got 3 very interesting tactics here that seem to be at the top of the persuasion influence. Rational persuasion, make good arguments, be logical. Try to inspire those around you by, this is, I think, a fairly positive tactic again. And consultation, a highly collaborative communication tactic. So here we have research that says, here's what's most influential in these situations. Pressure, legitimate, these we tend not to like as much. It's not that they don't work, but we as the target, when people are using them on us, we resist them more. And we probably are doing things and building a little bit more resistance and negativity against the person using them. So an interesting article there. You again can see the effectiveness rating, and we certainly do not like people ganging up on us. We do not like you using a legitimate title or authority or pressure. So there they are in the study. Again, 184, 185. All right, a couple other things to say about persuasion. There are certain reasons why we comply automatically, just things that seem to allow us to respond. The first one is reciprocation. Generally, if somebody does something for you, you do the same thing back. So if I help you move, you would help me move. I invite you over for dinner, then you invite me over for dinner. We tend to be persuaded simply by reciprocation. I'll reciprocate in kind. I want to mention consistency and commitment because, again, this is one people often overlook, and it goes back to norms. You have to be consistent, and you have to be committed to what you do and how you influence everyone. One of the biggest things I get all the time from students individually is, can I do some extra credit? And I say no. And I'll tell you why. Because I have to be very consistent and committed to how I grade my students. If there was a lot of variation, that would cause problems. And you guys would get mad and let me know it. So my motto is, I can't give you personally extra credit because that's not fair. If I give extra credit, what do I have to do? I have to give it to everyone. So what I might say to a student who asks me that is, no, but I may give an opportunity to the whole class later on, because that's more fair, it's more consistent, and how I view something like that, and I'm always trying to be committed to being fair and consistent. It persuades most people because most people will say, yes, that's fair, we'll go along with it. And if I do that consistently, they know that's the way I play, or those are the rules. Okay, social proof is an interesting one. Social proof is bandwagon, essentially, if you've ever heard of the fallacy of bandwagon or hopping on the bandwagon. It's this idea that we see other people doing it, so we assume it's good as well. Having just been in China, I was telling my class that I used this when buying water. You have to buy bottled water there. You can't drink it, the water. So I was looking at what kind everyone else was buying, and there was a particular brand, and I thought, well, that seems to be the popular one everyone is buying, so I guess that's the one I'll get too. So we are persuaded by what other people are doing in society or people we admire. So if someone we admire has a Mac laptop, we might go get a Mac too. We look to others. We look for that social proof in society and others around us. Probably the biggest quality as a leader that will make you influential is liking. You have to be likable. We don't listen to people we don't like. It's kind of simple there. But some people, I think, have a very difficult time with the communication skill of likability. And what does it mean nonverbally to be likable, to be approachable, to be open? I've seen lots of people who come across nonverbally very closed off, and they don't mean to, but they fold their arms. They constantly have maybe the resting bitch face phenomenon or something like that. And they don't come across as likable. So I think as a leader, you have to work very hard to be likable. We do things for people we like. Obviously, we comply with authority. The Milgram studies, very famous psychological studies, and I usually show a video of them in class. I can certainly give you a link. I'll put it up in the lesson here later if you'd like to watch that. And it says we comply with authority almost 100%. Legitimate or authority is, bar none, the most effective in getting us to comply. It's, however, we don't like it, but we obey it. And I think scarcity has an interesting principle here. Sometimes if we can't get something, it becomes more valuable. So even when iPhones started to come out, or even, I know, I'm old, the BlackBerry, you probably don't know what that is, but people scrambled to get their hands on it because it was scarce. So it became more valuable. Look at housing in San Diego. We don't have a whole lot of it. So guess what? It costs more. Scarcity is very influential. If something is readily available, we don't rush out to get it. So think about scarcity you may not have before. These 7 situational dimensions over here are not necessarily in your text, but they kind of describe a little bit further why someone might comply. If we view that person as dominant, more dominant than us physically, intelligence-wise, we may comply. If we have an intimate relationship with someone, we might comply based on the intimacy or how well we know someone. If we think that we're going to get a lot of resistance or a lot of negative flack for not doing something, we might comply. If it personally benefits us, we might comply. So if there's something in it for me. Also, do you even have the right to ask me to do something? Is it within my purview or my job role? Going back to that. What are the relational consequences that we have if we don't comply? And how much apprehension do I have about the tactic you're using? So those are just some more things we consider when we're being persuaded. So persuasion takes into account a ton of different dimensions. And we have a whole course on persuasion, and it's quite fascinating to look at why we won't do something. So definitely take a look at that portion in Chapter 6. I have probably some inaccurate page numbers on here because I think this might be the older edition. So this is on developing argumentativeness competence, which is actually on page 189. So I apologize for the different volumes or editions of the books. I know some of you are struggling with that. So the new argumentativeness scale is on page 190 in the newest edition of the text. But basically, there's 2 ideas here. It's said it is okay to be argumentative, and that is to use rational persuasion. However, verbal aggression is not okay. We say it's personal attacks, insults, teasing, even swearing at people. So verbal aggression is something we do not respond well to. And typically what happens in arguments is it turns into verbal aggression. So it didn't start out that way, but all of a sudden we find ourselves both yelling at each other saying, well, you're just stupid and you don't know what you're talking about. And it becomes this massive personal argument and we forgot whatever the topic was that we were arguing over. So this is a very big issue, and your book spends quite a bit of time talking about this notion of verbal aggression versus good argumentation or rational persuasion. And then on 195, it goes into climates. And this is an area of research that I have been doing for some time. My doctoral dissertation started on this topic, and I have published subsequently several articles on it. There is a climate, defensive versus supportive communication climate article under course documents. It's a publication that I wrote and published, and I definitely want you to read it because it's exciting. All right, so you're going to read that, and it is based off of Jack Gibb. You may have heard of him. Jack Gibb, 1961, analyzed small groups and said, if we use our communication, we can provide more supportive and stay away from the defensive means by which we communicate. And I agree completely. So, what does this boil down to? Do I have them up here? Here we go. I skipped a slide ahead. I'm going to come back to the other one. But creating a cooperative climate. Please read this article. This is big on exam 2. So what Gibbs said is oftentimes we talk in ways that are defensive. Defensive communication shuts down the conversation, whereas supportive communication tries to keep the lines of communication open. So let's look at the first one. And this is classic. I'm sure you've heard of it. It is what we call I versus you language. Do you evaluate the person and accuse them, or do you describe the behavior? What this means is if I say to you, you're stupid, you don't know anything, how likely are you to ask a question of me? I've just evaluated you. I've just told you you're stupid. And you're probably not going to be real willing to want to talk to me or come ask me a question in the future. However, how can I say that? Here's the twist. How can I say that without sounding so evaluative? And this is a hard one. Speaking of the I'm stupid, I might say I feel that getting into that issue might be a little too complex. I find this issue very complex. Maybe I can help you understand it more. These are ways that don't threaten the face of the person as much. Here's one I have to use personally. Someone say you're in a car driving with someone, you say, your driving is terrible. They're going to get mad and a fight will probably ensue. So I simply say, I'm starting to feel a little sick. Could you slow down or ease up on the braking? Something like that. It happens in couples too. And I talk about this in interpersonal, in everything, because your language so matters. So if you come home and say you're talking to your partner and you are getting frustrated because they're not telling you what you want, you say, you never tell me how you feel. And I guarantee they're not going to in that moment either because you've been defensive. But try description. I find it makes me feel really good when you can share a few more details about your day. This works. It really, really does. And I am a big fan of it. I've researched it for years, and I believe in this power to control and change our language. All right, that's just evaluation versus description. Control, we don't like people who tend to control everything and tell us what we have to do. We prefer problem orientation, which Gibb defines as collaboration. We want to be consulted. We want to be active and participating, which is fascinating because students expect control from me. Tell us what to do, we'll do it. And when I stand in front of a class and say, well, what would you like to do? I'm asking you to collaborate with me. And you're like dumbfounded by it. Sorry for the evaluative claim, but I find that you don't know what to do when I ask, your opinion because you've been controlled for so long. And it's interesting, but asking people for their opinion. Strategy versus spontaneity. Strategy is the defensive, and Gibb defines strategy basically as lying and manipulating. We don't like people who lie to us. You lie to me? You're not going to get extra credit. You're not even going to get much leeway because nobody wants to be lied to. Spontaneity, on the other hand, is defined as being open, being honest, telling the truth to people. So we give credit to people who tell us the truth, typically, even if it's a truth we don't want to hear. It doesn't mean that truths still don't cause problems. And if the truth of the matter is that the company is losing money, you'd still have to address that. But we certainly typically want the truth. The truth keeps the conversation open. Strategy shuts it down. Neutrality versus empathy. Neutrality is the defensive behavior. Lots of students come into my office and share good news with me. And I think it's because I react. I don't just sit there and say, well, good for you, I'm busy. It's kind of like maybe something great happened. You're so excited. You get home and you tell your roommate, and your roommate's like, whatever, I got stuff to do. And it hurts. It says, fine, I'm not going to talk to you then. We like people who respond to us with empathy. That is, say, wow, that's awesome. I'm so happy for you. Or what can I help you with? Even with problems. I get a lot of students who come to me with problems, and I could just say, well, yeah, it sucks to be you. You wouldn't come to my office anymore. But I usually try to respond with empathy and say, gosh, that really must be tough to be dealing with that right now. And we're going to find out when you read that article, the climate article I wrote, empathy is the number one thing you want from supervisors. When the research was done, we polled full-time working adults. They said, I want empathy. I want my superior or supervisor to understand what I'm going through and show me empathy. So very, very big, important issue in climate. Superiority versus equality. We do not like to be treated as less than. Equality is probably the best way to go. Superiority, when you pull the, well, I'm the boss, therefore you're not, goodbye. It doesn't influence communication when somebody pulls superiority on us. However, if you treat me like an equal, I am more apt to do what you want. I'm more apt to communicate with you. Sometimes we have this, people are so high up, we're afraid to communicate with them. And that's ridiculous. That does not promote collaboration. So hopefully our leaders in the highest positions treat us as equals, as the same as them, that we have ideas that are just as worthy as theirs. If they don't, we're probably going to be scared to go talk to them. And again, it doesn't facilitate communication. And the last one, certainty versus provisionalism. Certainty is dogmatic thinking. It's my father. He knows everything about everything. Oh, lordy, lordy. And he always starts, these people who start statements this way, you know what you need to do. You know what you should do. And it's defensive on every level. I mean, when I hear that, I usually stop listening. And I'm certainly probably not going to comment afterwards. We don't like single-minded, dogmatic people because what's the point in communicating? Their way is always going to be the only viewpoint they see. So it's very difficult to have the conversation. Hopefully, most people can have provisionalism. Provisionalism is flexibility in thinking, willing to explore other ways of thinking. So I see this a lot interculturally. Sometimes it's difficult because I might think, wow, the way we do that in the US is a lot better. But I know that's going to cause problems in conversations with people. And I'm constantly trying to be flexible and see things as different than the way maybe I was raised or the way I know them, and learn. That is going to continue communication and creates a supportive environment. Please If I haven't said it already, check out the article, the climate article. Very interesting because I think these are very specific cues you can start using to change the way you communicate. Supportive leaders are by far more effective than defensive ones. Okay, before I get to negotiation, I've got to go back to credibility. And your chapter actually starts with these three issues. So in chapter 6, it actually starts with the credibility, and you can certainly go back to the beginning of the chapter and take a look here. And these come from Aristotle, really. They're right there. Aristotle said, you have to have certain facets if you are going to persuade or even negotiate with people. So the third of his prong, we have logos, ethos, pathos. Remember those? I hope you do. Ethos is credibility. What does it take to be seen as credible? Well, competence. You have to be knowledgeable. We don't give a lot of credibility to people we do not think know a lot. So competence deals with your knowledge level. Does it mean you have to know everything? No, you have to appear competent in what you're talking about. All right. You also need trustworthiness. This is honesty. This idea that we can trust you. This one is more interesting because how do you appear trustworthy? Well, I think you are consistent in your behaviors. You do what you say. You tend to be open. All of these are ways you can be characterized as trustworthiness. The third prong of credibility is dynamism. This is, I think, confidence, it's inspiration, it's being dynamic. We like speakers and people who are exciting, who are dynamic. I try to use a lot of dynamism in my classroom because if I were to just stand up there and say, hey, we're talking about credibility, it just it doesn't get you excited. So using that energy, using that presence to speak to people and be dynamic, facial expressions and gestures, things that make us excited to listen to someone. And the last one there is co-orientation. And I think this one is very important as well. What this means, and your book doesn't talk about it at all, but Aristotle did, and it was referred to by Aristotle as common ground. What it means is I have to find something in common with you. I have to relate to you. If I cannot relate to you in some way, you're less likely to be persuaded by me. End of discussion. So how do I connect with people? Oftentimes when we find out we have a connection with others, we become so much more willing to be influenced by that person. So if I tell you that I really like, this is always so tricky, I try music. And if we listened to the same music, then you'd be like, whoa, and all of a sudden you might like me better. Let me put it this way. I was jealous because my son just went to Cage the Elephant and Beck. And I really wanted to go to that concert. And I didn't, but he did. Brat. Maybe you say, oh, I did too. And now you're probably even wondering, well, what other music do you listen to? Or maybe you're just saying, oh, I hate those two. I don't want to talk to you about music. So this idea of relating and connecting with people is very important. It can send someone in opposite directions. Salespeople know this. And a good salesperson will look their audience up and down or the person they're talking to and see if they can find something and make a relation. What I mean here is say you're wearing an LA Dodgers ball cap. I might say, wow, Dodgers, great season, right? Let's pretend. And you're like, yeah, I'm a big Dodgers fan. I'm like, me too. I have to be careful here because as a salesperson, I can say I'm a Dodgers fan and I know that's going to help get you persuaded by me. But what if I'm not really a Dodgers fan? You know what I'm saying? There's ways salespeople try to create common ground that may or may not even be real, but it works. And that's a certain issue here. We'll get into the ethics of that much later. But I was in Vietnam and a woman was trying to sell me things. They get you as you come right off the bus and they want you to buy their stuff. And she says, "Where are you from?" I'm like, "Oh, the United States." "Where?" "California." "I have family in California." And I'm like, "Really?" And I got so excited because we had this connection and I bought something from her. And after I did that as a teacher of persuasion, I said, "That woman has no family in California." And I just got taken. But she connected with me. She connected with me. And that's the most powerful form of persuasion or negotiation you can have. Find a connection with someone that you read the same books, you like the same music. This is exactly what we do in relationships. When we find someone we have something in common with, we become friends with them and are more likely to be persuaded and influenced by them. All right, I think you get the idea here. So the very last part of this somewhat lengthy lecture is on negotiations. And your book does take you through a few negotiation strategies. I'm going to bring up a few that I teach in small group, but I do want you to be familiar with them. And I know they're in your book here as I'm looking through it, and I was wondering if they were actually in Chapter 7, because I'm not seeing them in Chapter 6, which is interesting. Well, nonetheless, we're going to talk about them, so be aware they're here. It looks like they are not, that maybe they took negotiations out of your book, which kills me. I hate when they change things up. See, oh, here it is. No, it is Leader as Negotiator. But I don't think they give you these models. So, tip for tat. Tip for tat says, if I do it for you, you do something for me. We know reciprocation works. However, if you rely on this solely, it usually becomes a very negative strategy because everything then comes to be competitive. Well, if I do that for you, what are you going to do for me? And I see this particularly a lot in relationships. People say, well, I can't even ask for anything without proposing what they're going to, get out of it, or what I'm going to do for them if they do this for me. And what's happening is you're starting to define the relationship in terms of negative competition. So we often say it can work once or twice, but over time, this tends to be very negative strategy and not effective. And it's one we fall to a lot, but it really just doesn't work. All right, there are positional bargaining strategies. There is what we call driving a hard bargain. And this is no negotiation at all. This is my stance, take it or leave it. A lot of people go to hard bargaining as a way to just push the person. But here's the problem. You could push them the other way. So you say, here's what I'm offering on the job. I'll give you this much. Either take it or leave it. And the problem is people could leave it. They could walk away and say, I'm not going to take it. And you're out an employee now. A lot of hard bargaining, though, is characterized by the issues you see there. People walking out in a huff. It doesn't foster communication because you're basically saying it's this way or nothing at all. So there's no room for communication. There's no room to actually have the negotiation. And even once you do that, you start even refusing to budge on trivial issues, and you start issuing these kind of ultimatums. And this just is not effective. It might be effective, but you've got to decide how tough can you be if you're going to drive a hard bargain. Where do you draw the line? And that's a difficult question to answer. Not really a fan of hard bargaining. Soft bargaining isn't really effective either because soft bargaining basically says you're going to do whatever you need to keep the relationship. It's really a somewhat useless strategy as well. The strategy I prefer is GRIT, Graduated and Reciprocal Initiatives in Tension Reduction. All right, any negotiation always start off with a sincere statement. We kind of forget this part. Go back and remember, we're not going into a battle with someone. You want to solve something. So be likable. Remember, likable people we tend to do what they want. You go in trying to be an asshole, we're going to actually make it worse. So I think the very first thing is go in and issue, hey, we want to work with you. We really want to make this happen. So let's see what we can do. And I'm really glad you're here today. I mean, be likable. This is number one. You saw the video clip there. I didn't play it, but maybe I should have on negotiation, because this is one of my favorite negotiators of all time. You'll recognize it immediately. And
Writing's not that easy, but Grammarly can help. This sentence is grammatically correct.
Here we go.
What do we got here?
This is an old music box.
So how much are we looking to get out of it?
$1,000.
No. I'd really like to pay you right on $700 for this thing.
Can we meet somewhere in the middle?
600. What can I help you with?
Yeah, the shortwave radio is 1963 model Zenith Oceanic.
This thing is neat. I'd like to have it, but it's only going to make sense if I get it for the right price.
I'd like to have $80.
Yeah, for like $80, huh?
I can't take this first offer.
It's a fair price. This doesn't happen very often. But the guy obviously did his homework and threw out a fair price. So I took it. Go over there and write him up, chum.
$60.
$80, chum. Go write him up. So what do you want for this thing?
$3,500 for the
I'd give you $1,500 for it.
$1,500.
We don't work for charity. $1,500.
Well, I better take the $1,500 before the old man knocks me down even more.
Jack, you want, you got $3 grand.
How about $3,500?
How about $2,500?
You going the wrong way.
No, you go up, I go down.
I'll help you with it.
I have Cleveland Indians 1948 World Series pennants. I'd like to get $600 for both.
You know, I just hate to give people what they're asking, so why don't you let me give you $500?
I will accept that.
Okay, we got a deal.
All right. Thank you.
I'm really happy I got these pennants and for a great price. The guy knew what he had, but wasn't asking for a price out of the ballpark. Tell you what, I'll give you $200 for it.
That's a drop in a bucket for what you get for it, man.
You know, there's a limit to what I can pay for something. $200.
Deal.
What do you got here?
I have a 1916 to 1920 Ives train set.
Well, what are we looking to get out of it?
I really think it's worth $850. You guys will do all right on this, I promise you.
God, I hate it when people know what they got.
Well, a tough one, dude.
Give me $850.
Yeah. Can I keep my box?
No, man, the box is part of the deal.
All right. The reason I show that is a couple things are happening here that I find fascinating. Rick is, I think, very likable. He's humorous. He's the bald guy. And I think he almost uses the old man as the good cop, bad cop. But certainly he is extremely likable. He's funny. He's honest. He knows what people have. And he follows through with it. And that's what makes him good at what he does. Again, the old guy drives a little bit more, and here's interesting, when you know you've been fair, when you know you've given them all you can, I think that's the time to drive the harder bargain, like he did with the guy there who had that water wheel thing, and he said 200, and the guy finally just says, yeah. But he's sincere. He looks at what he has and he specifies what he wants. And that's specify the concession you want. What is it that you want from the person? Then follow through and complete it. Don't make it contingent upon other things. Just be sincere. Say, hey, you got it. We know it. We'll go ahead and give you that. And then you go through with it. He did the last one there, throw in about the case. And it's like, no, you get the case, follow through. Don't demand reciprocation. When reciprocation is demanded is exactly when we are not going to give it. And certainly don't risk anything you're not willing to. This negotiation strategy works. I've used it with my own boss, where I go in and say, I'm so happy you're here. I love working here. And blah, 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 whatever. Just, we joke around for a bit. And I say, look, my job description is getting out of control. I've just got way too many things on my plate. So I said, I want one thing off. One thing that I'm not responsible for anymore. And I'm not going to make that contingent on anything else. I just want one thing off my plate. So we just start the discussion of what's the one thing. She threw out an issue, and I was like, that one doesn't really cost me a lot of time. The one that's costing me the most time with the least benefit to my job is X. And I tell her what that is. And she says, all right, if that's the one you want off your plate, we'll do it. And I said, that's amazing. Thank you so much. I did make high-risk concessions. I didn't say it was my course load or anything major. It was something on the side that I was doing that was consuming a lot of time that really could be done by anyone. So I picked the right thing. She agreed to it. Nobody demanded any she didn't say, well, if I'm going to let that go, then you've really got to make sure that you do better in the other areas. None of that crap went on. Again, it wasn't anything high risk, and I got what I wanted. So this works when you go in to negotiate. I find that our comm majors are not good negotiators because they don't like to approach and confront. And we've got to relearn that strategy as leaders, because you will have to negotiate in the business world as a leader with clients. And this is a strategy that really works. And that is the end for Chapter 6.